I would like to just take a minute to thank Mark again for all of his remarks. Thank you, Mark. I've had a lot of good teachers in my time, and my mother and father were both teachers, and so I was raised to honor and respect those who are wise and teach us. And one of the things that I've learned as someone who lives in this part of the country is that it's a status of honor to be a grandfather. And so that you have the wisdom you have and you come here, and I know this is not the first time you've come to our state because I look forward to you coming and enjoying your talks every time you come. I want to thank you for your years of commitment and the wisdom and your eloquence and you coming here to teach all of us from your experience and the impact that you've had, so thank you for that. And as you can imagine, after a speech like that, it's never all that fun to back clean up. So I will do my best. And I don't know if you've read the bios, but if you happen to glance at mine, you'll see that my education consisted of trying to find a way to read stories and get away with it for credit. But what it did teach me to do is recognize metaphors. So I like to think about metaphors and symbols, and the remarks I'll share with you today are very brief. But I was told by the planning committee that there are essentially three goals that I have in my the topics that I'll share with you. The first one is a bridge, so to provide a bridge from Mark's remarks to the next segment of the agenda. The second metaphor is the scoop. So I'm here to share with you some of the efforts that Mark described, that, but saying, okay, here's real-time what's going on in Minnesota with some of the types of things that Mark described around the country. And then the third one is really about a web. We all are a web in this larger food movement in our state, and I'll talk a little bit about the promise and potential of that as well. So those are the three things I'll share with you. And I guess I'll start out a little bit with talking about why Mark did such a beautiful job of describing the challenges and problems and of our current food system, but also honoring and acknowledging that, in fact, the food system is always a challenge and a problem throughout time, throughout space. How we grow food, how we get food, is a complicated undertaking for any community and requires a lot of difficult decisions and a lot of trade-offs. And most often, as Mark described, an awful lot of power imbalances, not just between people and communities, but between people and species. So I think we have, again, this newest chapter ahead of us. So for many species, food is life. Sun and water are needed to grow plants. These plants feed people and other animals. Some of these animals who eat those plants eat other animals that eat plants, like many of us. We are one of those animals. Because food is life for all of us, we worry about it. We worry about healthy soil, water, and air. We worry about plant disease and pests that eat plants. We worry about what types of plant varieties can resist disease and changes in weather and produce enough so that we can feed those animals and ourselves on a regular basis. We worry about what kind of food to grow and how to grow it. We worry about how to keep it so that we have enough of it in times of the year when we can't grow it, and so that it is safe and won't make us sick. We worry about how far it has to travel and if it will perish and nourish us. We worry what ways are best for growing food, best for our health, best for the land, best for other animals and species, best for the farmers and the workers who make sure we have food to eat. We wonder in a cold place like this how to grow enough food that supports our health, supports our economy, and supports the landscape in the brief window of time that we have to grow it, just a few months of the year. We worry about the implications of technologies we have developed that mean people can do things with their time other than the hard labor associated with growing food. We worry about the technologies that do mean that more food can be grown with less effort or cost, and more food resists diseases that can decimate our food supply. The challenge of feeding ourselves is a perennial human problem, one that every society and every era must confront, and each time we build a food system, it's a complex and imperfect system that generates consequences from the design decisions we make that end up plaguing and challenging us. It's not easy to feed ourselves. We know from Mark's remarks that many folks struggle with obesity and chronic disease. We know many no longer know how to grow, preserve, prepare, and plan for healthy food and healthy meals. Many have lost touch with the stories and knowledge ways of their cultural food practices, and many cannot afford healthy food. Many do not have access, and many of us are affected deeply by the design of our food supply. So despite what you think the solutions are to all of these problems, what we do know is that there is a problem with our food supply. It's insufficient in many ways, and we're in the midst of this public process of trying to figure out how to resolve it. When we talk about some of the health issues and chronic diseases and issues like hunger, those are really downstream symptoms, as Mark described, of an upstream problem. But when we use a food systems approach, we recognize that some of the solutions we have to develop aren't just about getting enough food to everyone. It's also about all the infrastructural decisions and processes we have to develop in order to make that happen. And as I go around the state and think about what are kind of the main buckets or areas of concern that people have, it strikes me that it falls into a few different categories. The first thing we worry about is sustenance. How can we sustain ourselves? It's working, I'm doing two here. So with sustenance, we worry about what is it that we need to do to make sure that we have food that nourishes us. Of course, sustenance is not enough. We need nourishing food, but we also need enough of it. Sustenance and subsistence. And many of us ask the questions in terms of land and longevity and resilience, about sustainability. And of course, sustainability is about lasting food. Do we have enough food to last us? So these three domains, is there enough? Will it nourish us? And will it last through time? And are we tending to all of the systems in a good way that will help us have the food we need that will keep us healthy? And of course, what we're beginning to see with communities is they look around at the food system that Mark described, and they're starting to say, we would like, can you see the image? We would like to opt out. This is not what we want. This is not what we want for our families. This is not what we want for our communities. We want to opt out. And so what we're seeing across the country is innovation of individuals, but also, as Mark described, advocacy and connecting and organizing and movement building and engagement at a civic level, food citizenship, as Mark described it, as people at all scales work together to develop solutions that enable them to opt out of the things that make us unwell. So here's the bridge part and the scoop part. Mark talked a little bit about the role that food policy councils and food networks can play at various scales to implement the kinds of changes that we need in policy, in economic development, in healthy food access. And here in Minnesota, we have a really exciting ground game. I too have gray hair. It's a little less obvious because I go a couple times a year to, so I've been around a while too. And one of the things that's been really exciting to watch in the last 5 or 7 years is this incredible proliferation of networks emerging where people are saying, as communities at all scales, we would like to opt out, but we know we need to work together in a strategic way to do so. And so I wanted to share a little bit with you about the food networks around the state, and I'm going to just tee it up and ask those of you in the audience who are involved to help me out in describing this. So if you have attended or are involved with some type of food network or food council, would you please stand up? Okay, so look around the room. We have, Tiki, is it 450 or 500 people at this event I think we've got so far? So take a look. Now, the reason I wanted to read stories is because I'm bad at math, but this looks like 40%, maybe 30 or 40% of folks standing up. If I had asked this question 5 years ago in the room, first of all, the hunger relief folks would stand up maybe a little bit separately from the folks who are working on food systems, and now what we're seeing is these sectors are building bridges: local public health, food systems advocates, hunger relief, many other organizations, agriculture, and we're also seeing them form these councils and work together. So if we think about it at a regional and sub-regional scale, there are circles of growth and development around food council work across the state. And I wanted to provide a list. Now you see the last check mark says and. So this is an incomplete list, and if you can see it, I'm going to read some of them off, and then I invite those of you, because I know this is not a full list, and I know there are many of you here who are involved. I just ran out of space on my slide. Superior Good Food Network, Hadwaters Food Sovereignty Council, Pine and Lakes Local Foods Working Group, Pride of the Prairie, Homegrown Minneapolis, St. Paul Ramsey County Food and Nutrition Commission. You can see the rest of the list on the screen. Who else is involved with the Food Council or Food Network that's not listed on the screen? Could you shout it out now, please? I know it's the Metro Food Access Network. Thank you, Mary. Bloomington, Edina, Richfield Community Food Partnership. Cottonwood, Jackson, Faribault Food Policy Council. So there are a few more too, but you can see this list, which was probably about 5 to 7 years ago, is now so long that it doesn't fit on one slide. And so I wanted to show you some of the things that they're working on. This is an incomplete list. It's a little bit dark, so I'll help through. Creating grants and technical assistance for food-related entrepreneurs to start businesses who are growing and processing local foods. Working with hospitals to improve healthy food options, increasing healthy food options in food shelves, improving school food access across the region, improving school food across the region, improving healthy food access through healthy corner stores and groceries, building distribution networks of farmers to supply institutional buyers and restaurants, establishing zoning policies to protect farmland of small farmers, launching and expanding farmers markets, creating policy to foster urban agriculture, and that is just a very short list. There's a serious food policy ground game across the state. Many of you are building this groundswell, and you are working on systems-level efforts to change the food supply for members of your community. You're doing it at the sub-regional level, you're doing it at the regional level, and we're doing some work at the state level. What I'm also beginning to see in the food movement is after this large groundswell and engagement of multiple sectors beginning to work together in food policy councils, I'm also starting to see some really exciting innovation and investment from the private sector. This is new in just the last few years. I live in Minneapolis, and one of the things that's happened literally in the last 2 months is this mushrooming of brand new cooperative grocery stores that will be getting started. There are several underway in the Twin Cities, which hasn't seen this kind of growth in many, many years. We're seeing all kinds of private banks and angel investors investing at a significant scale to build new infrastructure and enterprises that will be able to support the growth of regional food infrastructure and provide food at a scale that can supply hospitals, can supply schools, can supply large institutions, and can actually change extensively what's also available in retail settings. So we are seeing the private sector wake up and pay attention and say, there's a huge demand and an opportunity here and a gap and potential that we see, and we're stepping in. So there are banks providing substantial loans, we have angel investors, and we have a lot of new enterprises, and food hubs, as Mark described, are one example of that. But if we follow, if anybody a beer drinker in the room? Yeah, a few of you. I think I saw some of you last night, beer. So what we're seeing is if we look at the rise of the craft beer industry in Minnesota, we can see that the growth and development of this food system, this regionally scaled food system, is underway. So I want to talk briefly about the Minnesota Food Charter and then share a little bit with you about what you're going to be doing next. The Minnesota Food Charter is both a public process and a document that is collecting the insights and vision of everyone around the state who would like to see a different kind of food supply. They're sharing their insights about the barriers and strategies around how to address the food skills gap that we have. They are talking about how to improve food accessibility, food availability, food affordability, and how to create this food infrastructure through policy and systems and environmental changes that can build the food supply that we dream of. The Minnesota Food Charter is underway right now. Many of you may have participated in Minnesota Food Charter events. There'll be a public review process this fall that you'll be hearing about. If you haven't clicked like on Facebook, you can go today. If you'd like to visit our website, the URL is at the bottom. There's still time, folks, 2 more weeks to host a food charter event. We've had 120 food charter events registered so far. We're getting 2 or 3 registered each day. We've had several thousand people participating in one way or another. If you'd like to respond but can't attend an event, when you go to the website, you can put your input individually online. If you're going to the state fair, stop by the University of Minnesota's College Food, Ag, and Natural Resource Sciences booth. They'll have laptops there where you can enter in your input into the Minnesota Food Charter. That document that will get developed over the next several months and will go live next year will contain an architecture of vision and very specific strategies and discussion that local food policy councils, regional food policy councils, and even, let's dream, a state food policy council in Minnesota can take on to address the barriers and implement some of the exciting and interesting initiatives we'd like to see. I'm getting the wrap up, right? Am I? Yes. So, in closing, Minnesota, both the University of Minnesota, which is our land-grant university, and a lot of farmers around the state, and I come from a farming family, so it's pretty familiar to me, have talked and thought a lot about this idea of feeding the world and the role that Minnesota agriculture plays in that paradigm. One of the things we're seeing with this new food movement is how we can think like a region to build that mid-scale local and regional food supply that Mark described. And that is what I'm encouraging all of you to do today. Thinking like a region requires thinking a little bit bigger than very grassroots and very local, but quite a bit smaller than that global food supply. There's a lot of room for creativity and innovation there, and that, in fact, is where the real juice of these food networks and food councils around the state are going to be focusing their time. So I encourage you to start thinking with your colleagues about what it means to think like a region, to build momentum, to create the changes you want to see in your food supply for the next generation and beyond. So what are we going to do today? You're going to be heading to regional breakouts after this break. You'll be transitioning through, and what you're going to do is participate in a structured sequence process where you'll have a chance to talk and reflect more on Mark's remarks, and end with a group process where you produce some common themes that are true for your region around domains of work and potential outcomes you'd like to see related to the food system in your region. So it'll be very interactive, a lot of fun, and a chance for you to do some networking. And so a last bit of instruction as you transition into the break, which will be about 15 minutes long. It's sort of like passing time plus enough time to get a caffeine refill, is you'll head to your rooms. And for those of you, how many of you work in a capacity where you serve the entire state? Many of you do. So this is for you folks. If you serve in a statewide capacity, I ask that you farm yourself out across the regional breakouts rather than clumping yourself all, for example, in the Twin Cities Metro breakout session. Not surprisingly, that one is a little bit bigger than the other states, and we would love to have some of those statewide folks seed themselves across those regional breakouts to contribute to the discussion. So thank you, Mark. Thanks to all of you. Go build those regional food networks. Go build that regional food supply.